Okay, I think we're recording now.
Howdy.
Good afternoon from the Shreveport office of Eagle Financial Wealthcare for the June the 15th edition of the Jack and Bill Show. It's been a while. We're going to try to come to you more frequently in the future. Bill, what are we going to discuss today?
How about a little history?
Okay, that sounds
A
good.
little history. And you'll catch on as to why I'm even discussing this topic as I conclude. Let's go back in time to November the 11th, 1918. That was Armistice Day. That was the conclusion of 4 years of bitter fighting that left 15 to 19 million people dead, another 23 million injured. World War I, obviously, is what I'm discussing. And there was a British author, H.G. Wells, who coined the term the war to end all wars. That's what many people describe World War I as. And Wells even wrote that the Allied soldiers were not merely soldiers, but crusaders against war. Well, that all sounded very noble and idealistic, but it was also very naive, because it was only 15 years later that a fascist dictator named Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany. And he rebuilt the German war machine, plotted revenge. Meantime, the Allied countries were lulled into complacency and appeasement. And the rest is, well, history. After the second war to end all wars, World War II, the Allies divided the geographical spoils of war between the East and the West. Germany was divided into two countries, East and West Germany. The Soviet Union occupied East Germany. US, Britain, and France occupied West Germany. The German capital, Berlin, was similarly divided. Eastern European countries came under communist control and formed what was called the Warsaw Pact, which was effectively a puppet of the Soviet Union. Western European countries retained their sovereignty, and most joined the NATO alliance. And from that point forward, a Cold War spanning decades ensued between the two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States.
And you and I both served in the armed
That's
forces
correct. During the Cold War.
During the Cold War. I actually have a combat readiness medal for, mind if I share?
Yeah.
Oh, so some people might find this interesting, unrelated to finance.
Oh, but it will be.
It will be. Okay, we're getting there. But from 1986 to 1989, 1 week out of every 3 or 4, I had to inhabit a hardened bunker in Shreveport, Louisiana, ready for at any moment's notice of the sound of a klaxon, which meant that our crew had to do a rapid response to the aircraft and start engines, decode a classified message, which gave us, utilizing two-man policy, determine what our actions were to be, whether it be, I can't confirm nor deny the presence of nuclear weapons in Shreveport, but whether or not we were going to take off and go fly the mission that we had planned on Thursday morning that was awaiting us when we changed places with the existing crew. So we stayed in the hardened bunker for a week, and you play a lot of card games and watch some bad TV and hang out in stinky green flight suits and eat cafeteria food. And then we did that till 1989 when the Cold War ended and nuclear alert ended. But we were 24/7, 365 ready to take off and go. So
so it was basically 5 decades of Cold War. Yeah, 5 decades. So now
so why'd
let's
they
fast
call it a
forward.
Cold War?
Because it was not a kinetic war between the two major superpowers, but both powers.
Guess that'd be a hot war.
That'd be a hot war. Both powers, were certainly ready in anticipation of a kinetic conflict. Plus, they also had proxy wars going around the world, like in Korea, in Vietnam, for example, and Afghanistan. So let's fast forward. November the 9th, 1989. That was the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, that was a physical concrete barrier separating East and West Berlin, and it was breached by East Berlin protesters. And it was historically significant because it marked the beginning of the end of communist control of Eastern Europe. And it led to the eventual reunification of Germany and the dissolution of the Soviet Union. 1 week after that event, a young Bill McCollum arrived in West Germany. And I was a freshly minted Russian linguist, signals intelligence specialist. And I was assigned to the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in West Germany along the former East-West German border. The fall of the Berlin Wall, while significant, really did not affect our mission because there were still plenty of bad guys just on the other side of that border. And what was called the Fulda Gap was a geographically significant lowland through which the Warsaw Pact and Soviet forces would theoretically push through with heavy armor if they were to ever attack Western Europe. So during this Cold War period, and as I said earlier, it spanned 5 decades, Germany hosted more foreign troops, military bases, and weapons stockpiles than any other country in the world. And I believe at one time there were as many as 250,000 U.S. military personnel stationed in Germany. And it made sense because Germany was situated on the edge of freedom along the former Iron Curtain. So it was a very interesting time in history. But, that season came to a conclusion. Well, let's fast forward even more to 2024. 2 weeks ago, I returned to Germany. My first time back in country in 32 years. And I traveled back there with my wife for an Army reunion. And we went back to Fulda, where we were stationed along the former East-West German border. I love Germany. It's a beautiful country. So many sites and other enjoyable activities that we participated in brought back a lot of fond memories. But I did notice some major changes since I was stationed there. And one of the biggest changes that I saw is what I would say is a sense of complacency in not just Germany, but across Western Europe. 3 decades of post-Cold War peace has meant that these Western European militaries have drawn down. The German military is a fraction of its former self, whereas they used to have conscription, mandatory conscription for young age males. They ended that years ago. Without a common enemy, the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, there was really no logical justification to maintain such a strong military defense across Western Europe.
Bill, I think that France and Germany and others were just shocked that what Russia did with Ukraine and going right through there.
Well, that's right, and yeah,
So,
And that's what I'm going to touch
and
on.
I think, yeah, I don't know where you're going with that, but I think that they probably felt like Mother USA is there to bail them out.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Well,
keep going.
So during this peacetime period, as I mentioned, Germany, France, Britain especially drew down their militaries. Complacency has ruled the day, and these countries in Western Europe redirected military spending to social welfare spending. That all changed with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I guess the signs were there because Russia had previously invaded the country of Georgia. And I think the question we should all ask is, how did we miss that? And I do recall that even as Russia had amassed military forces along the Ukrainian border, the analysts downplayed the risk. It would be a minor incursion, if at all. That's what they told us. Well, more recently, we had a similar intelligence failure in Israel. And it's been reported that the Israeli Defense Forces obtained Hamas's full invasion plans months beforehand and dismissed the threat. So these are tactical
How about
errors.
the Chinese balloons?
Oh, Korea.
And then they're doing it in North Korea and in the South Korea. But I mean, they
two
came right
different
across. That was what, a year ago?
Right, the Chinese spy balloons.
Coming, several of them coming all the way across America.
I thought you were talking about the poop-filled balloons that North Korea sent in.
There's probably more than that.
Right.
I mean, Bill, if I were a resident of Seoul, Korea, I'd be very concerned about mustard gas or something like that. Imagine what you could do with one of those balloons.
I mean, Seoul is within artillery range of the DMZ. But as I said, these are tactical errors that were committed by smart people. I mean, we could even go back to the attack on Pearl Harbor and say there were tactical errors committed by U.S. intelligence. But I see psychological factors at play in all of this, and that's where I see, here I'm going to connect the dots, that's where I see parallels to, these geographical or geopolitical miscalculations and investor misbehavior. Since October of 2022, we've seen a very strong and resilient U.S. stock market. Risks have largely been downplayed. Recession risk, no one cares about recession risks. Higher for longer interest rates, no one's concerned about that. And investors have largely taken this cavalier, what me worry attitude, and that can be costly. And I read recently where Morgan Stanley's chief U.S. equity strategist recently gave up his bearish outlook. Now, he could have simply reassessed his position in light of new data or changing market conditions. That's a good thing. No one should be, stiff-necked about a market outlook. We have to change as data changes. But on the other hand, he could have changed his outlook because he caved to pressure, and that would be bad. I don't know. But I do know this. I believe it is wise for investors to balance optimism, let's call it overconfidence, with healthy doses of opposing views, situational awareness, and even pessimism. And we know that the great ones, the great investors, they harness inquisitiveness. They discount market narratives, the common themes, that investors latch onto. And they constantly ask the question, what could go wrong? Because we have incomplete information, we make assumptions, and our assumptions could be wrong. So when the financial markets are priced for perfection, and I believe that they are priced for perfection, there's little room for error. So what if the unexpected happens? Sometimes winning means not losing as much. Now, let's go back to Europe, because I was, being a little critical of the UK, France, and Britain, who were strong militaries in Western Europe, no more. Who, or which countries, I should say, are taking the Russian threat seriously? Well, obviously Ukraine, but outside of Ukraine, Poland and the Baltic states are taking the Russian threat very seriously because they are now on the forward edge of freedom. And Poland has come out and said that they will have the largest standing military in Europe. They're taking this threat seriously. I recently read also where Poland now spends a higher percentage of their GDP on military than any other NATO member, including the US. So I would just say that maybe as investors, we like to throw out that Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And I'd also throw out there that if we want a good idea of where we're going, we should know where we came from. Maybe as investors, we should be more like Poland.
Oh, that's good, Bill. I would say, you mentioned what could go wrong. Think about this, that with the complacency of Europe, and I think historically, I would say really since the ending of the British Empire and the reemergence or emergence of, if you will, the American Empire post World War II, we were a mighty nation. It seems like we've lost our edge, know-how, and understanding about fighting a war to win a war. This could be offensive, to some, but we just had the 80th anniversary of D-Day and Normandy, where more than 10,000 people died. 90% of the people, the first waves that landed on Omaha Beach, 90% of those people died that morning, on the beach. And
They were kids.
They were kids. Some of them weren't even 18 yet. So those were people. These were people that never got the chance to have a wife, have a family, own a house, drive a fast car, experience those kinds of things. Yet they died so that you and I can do this. And I think that we've kind of lost that. And some of the bad actors out there have been watching this nation that used to be the glue that has held all the other nations together, even economically speaking. If America sneezes, emerging markets have great difficulty. But you look at what happened with the American embassy in Benghazi. Look at how we exited Afghanistan. Look at our response to the Russian troops amassing along the border for weeks. It was months, I think, and then nothing done at all.
And I'll just interject. You mentioned Afghanistan. I read this week where Al Qaeda is active in Afghanistan again.
Yeah, absolutely they are.
And they're recruiting, and they are plotting whatever they want to do, to spread global terrorism.
Absolutely. So now we've got, Europe crying for America to have a stronger military. We've got the Chinese Taiwan thing. And surely some of these nations think that we have a very weak president based upon the dialogue with Israel, for example, who I believe has a war that they want to win. That kind of vernacular speech is really not part of, it seems like, the American way and our military. these days. So, and look at what's happening with Israel. There could be another front to that with Lebanon. But I think there's a significant probability that we could be tested before the next election. And I think some of these foreign countries fear Trump. And if they felt like Trump were going to get in there, like China could in fact invade, Taiwan based upon our response with Israel, Afghanistan, some of these things. And
Well, a new axis of evil has clearly emerged. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. And they are testing the West right now.
yeah, think about this, because I read a lot of the criticisms about Ukraine. Okay, this escalation. We don't want to have F-16s parked in Ukraine because we're afraid they might be destroyed, or even have Ukrainians using that special armament and weaponry that they've needed, which now we're dragging on and on. We're incrementally doing more and more and more. Why didn't we do this, from the start? Why wasn't this war? Why didn't the West try to win this? You might say, from the start. So
Yeah, you're going to open up a can of worms with that question, because that is a politically loaded question, and people will finger point, blame each political party.
oh, absolutely.
But something we have learned is that Russia is very good when it comes to war footing, and when Russia gets in a war posture, it unifies the country. So despite all of the economic pressure that Russia's been under due to Western bans and such against Russia, they seem to be weathering that okay. And they are able to generate munitions much cheaper and much faster than we in the West can do.
Yeah, it's really, this thing has evolved from something that initially looked like it was going to be short term to something now more like it's not potentially not winnable for Ukraine.
I don't think it's winnable for either side.
Yeah, exactly. So these are things that could really, I would say, it's doubtful that this is discounted in the marketplace. Any kind of you can think about these things as being across the pond or not directly related, not on our soil. But then here we go financially, about complacency. Think about where this inflation problem that we had, the Fed's going to come into the rescue, and we're at the last 8 months in our fiscal year have seen a fiscal deficit of $1.2 trillion, which seems just enormous to me. And so with 4 months to go to that, that is very large, historically speaking, when you have a growing economy. But think about this. So we've got CPI, inflation basically languishing around 4%. We would have, if you look back 6 months, look back another 6 months, look back another 6 months, all of the forecasts were for rates to have come way down by now. And so now we have the Fed decision tomorrow, which is almost 100% going to be nothing. People are going to be looking for clues from the language, what Jerome Powell says. But we also have the CPI print tomorrow and the PPI print on Thursday. And those are things that are worrisome. If, I was listening to someone on Fox Business today discussing the mortgage scene, and that interest rates were, this person remembers when mortgage rates were 13%. I think they went all the way up to 20, but they're talking about, the Fed's getting ready to ease, so mortgage rates are probably coming down to 5. I mean, not so fast. We've economists have misforecasted this all along the last couple of years. So, and there are at the margin, Bill and I just read a wonderful piece. We'd recommend that if anyone can get their hands on it. It's an interview from Dave Rosenberg at Breakfast with Dave. And
actually, you can watch the video. It's posted on our Facebook page.
Okay, and Jeffrey Gundlach, who's regarded now as Bond King #2. Bond King, he really kind of replaced Bill Gross as the Bond King, and Bill Gross got complacent, got run out of PIMCO, perhaps due to his arrogance and a few missteps, and goes to Janus and runs an unconstrained bond fund and blows up himself and all of his investors. So, but there's a very nice piece, very nice interview with Dave Rosenberg and Jeffrey Gundlach. And one of the most striking things or things to remember is how he likes to make lots of small bets. And like someone might say, well, if interest rates are going down, why wouldn't you put everything in 30-year U.S. Treasuries? Well, because if you're wrong,
that's right, we could be wrong.
If you're wrong about that, your portfolio is going to blow up, and all your assets are going to go out the door, and you will lose a lot of money for your clients. So he articulated how he's been in the business for 40 years or something like that, maybe 50. And no matter how strongly he feels about something, you don't put all your eggs in that basket, because, and he talked about this, if you have 10 investment decisions to make and you're correct on 6 of those, you can make some decent money.
Yep.
So if you're wrong 40% of the time, you can do quite well. If you're wrong only 30% of the time, you can do spectacular. But imagine that, if you're wrong even only 30% of the time, which is better than most, you're still going to be wrong, 1 times out of 3.
Well, it makes me think about the passive indexing craze, and it's worked very well, for 20 years. I mean, it's been tremendous. So someone could say, well, you know what? I'm not going to pay for active management. I'm just going to buy the S&P 500 index, and I'm diversified. I have 500 names. These are all great U.S. companies. Well, here's the problem with that. What's driving that index? It's not 500 names.
It's 5 names.
It's 5 names, and in the last few months, it's been 1 name, NVIDIA.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Gundlach points that out in this article. He's one. The one thing that I would preface these remarks with is that he's been so right with his forecasting about the bond market and the stock market. And it's a little scary. He does not like the stock market at all. And for that reason, S&P 500, 27% of the S&P 500 is in the 5 largest names. And generally, anytime we've gotten, that's 1% of the names is 27% of the market. And over multi-year periods after the market has had these names that everyone's enamored with, usually do much better in value or equally weighted, indices. So,
to your point, Gundlach has a very good track record. I think his big appeal is that he's an everyday guy. He's a pragmatist. He talks like an ordinary person. He's not he's not one of these beltway academic types. Yes, he is a bond guru. But if you really want to know how the world works financially, you look to the bond market. And that insight into the workings of the global bond market informs him about other markets like the global stock market. And so
interest rates are the key to everything with the stock market right now.
everything.
So if we have, you know, significantly higher long-term rates, the market really doesn't have a chance. So there's a lot being pinned upon, you know.
And that's why we've seen this bifurcation between these big tech names in the S&P 500 and the rest. These big tech names have a lot of cash. They don't need to borrow money.
I would say, you know, I was reading the here's devil's advocate, or play the other side to this, is and I believe that this makes sense. The Bank of America chief market strategist was saying that I can remember from 1/1/1995 to 12/31/99, right before we had Y2K. That 5-year period, the S&P 500 compounded at 28% per year. That's doubling your money in just slightly over 3 years, and you did that for 5 years. So S&P 500 went up, you know, a couple of times in that 5-year period. And so I can remember, but the tech stocks, I almost lost my train of thought there. What happened during that period? It was 1995. It was the emergence of really the internet taking hold, really, and then all these tech stocks. And back then, like Dell Computer was a tech stock, okay, or, you know, AOL, email coming out, you know, and then a lot of these high flyers that aren't around anymore. Anything in telecommunications and Global Crossing, these names that, you know, failed. And but in 95, 96, 97, you say, okay, we're going up 28% a year. This thing is getting kind of bubbly. Then in 98 and 99, you had people, 85-year-old clients calling, you know, wanting to know why they don't own tech stock ABC, something that would fluctuate 20% in a day. And but to my point, the Bank of America analyst said this feels to him a lot more like 95, 96 with the AI stuff. As Gunlock points out, you know, just the term AI is everywhere. I notice now if you Google something, for example, you get an AI response, which I can't stand or trust.
Well, anything with AI in it, in the name or in the earnings report, you know, if AI is mentioned in an earnings report, it's like
my mother's calling.
So
yeah,
if you just a mention of it, the stock gets a premium price. And during the tech bubble, anything that had the word internet associated with it have, you know, commanded a premium.
Yeah, the real test here is trying to gauge. I think you have to have some exposure to this stuff because just like 95 to 2000, you had value stocks, things like cyclical stocks, financials, you know, autos, airlines. They all performed terrible during that period because there was a huge rotation that went into anything tech. And so now we're seeing a rotation. You know, why would you want to own those things? Financials, you know, selling it that's dull and boring, doesn't have any sizzle, you know, when you can own NVIDIA or microchip XYZ. But I think, you know, I was visiting with an affluent client last week, and he says, how can microchips not make money the next 2 or 3 years? Well, there's another part to that, and that is, I would think that there's going to be unbelievably enormous demand for microchips for the next 2 or 3, 5, and 10 years. You know, there's definitely a shortage of them right now. I mean, NVIDIA growing revenues at 300%, you know, in a quarter. Well, but what price are you paying for those earnings?
Well, that's right.
And where can it go wrong?
Well, here's where it can go wrong. is because the prices and the shortages of microchips and the prices that they're commanding, it's just simple supply and demand. So you'll have competitors come in, more supply hits the marketplace. Many of these big tech companies that are buying NVIDIA chips are creating their own chips so that in the future they will not be dependent upon NVIDIA. They will be producing these processing chips in-house.
But then we can go back to the psychology of investing, because when we got into late 97, and then by 1998, 1999, nobody cared. So in 1997, people were acting foolishly, but that thing went on, for 3 more years. And
we don't know when it ends.
Yeah.
And we're not saying this is a bubble. We're just saying this to say, be diligent, be vigilant, be aware,
be diversified.
Be diversified. If we are in a bubble, sometimes you just don't know it, except with the benefit of hindsight. And the other thing is, even if you do believe we are in a bubble, we don't know when it ends, but you don't want to be the last one standing when the music stops.
Why not?
Because you lose.
Okay.
How's that?
I think that's good, William. I think that we can stop right here. It looks like sporting news.
Well,
It looked like the Georgia was playing, SEC's Georgia was playing 7th seeded Georgia against 10th seeded NC State last night, and I watched it. I didn't watch the last inning, so I think NC State walloped them. Anyway, so had Georgia won, it would have been 5 SECs against 3 ACCs in the this weekend starts the College World Series. But it's the ACC's got the upper hand this year with the College World Series. It's going to be 4 against 4, and we had UNC knock out LSU last night. Georgia knocked out by NC State, and we've got a guy behind the camera over there that's a UNC grad. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. So we will see you next time. Thank you for watching and listening.